Shades, Chapter 9, page 96. Liz sat in the waiting area outside of the hospital emergency room wing. She wanted out of the hospital, or at least to get out of the waiting room and outside for a couple of minutes, but she had the feeling that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. The waiting room was bright, filled with early afternoon sunlight that poured in through the slated blinds. People sat and talked, some of them acting like they'd had quite a bit of experience sitting in the hard, uncomfortable chairs. Others fidgeted or flipped through magazines without any real comprehension. A handful looked sick and nauseated, only inches away from being truly desperate. All things considered, Liz thought the hospital waiting room wasn't an ideal place to spend time worrying about someone. Even though she didn't know Wilkins, she thought enough of him that she felt guilty. Mostly her thoughts were on Max, wondering where he was and why he hadn't come when he'd found out what had happened at the crash down. Unless he doesn't know, she told herself. Quickly, she tried to cut down on that line of thinking because those thoughts got intense with a scary suddenness. Liz glanced at her father at the other end of the room. Jeff Parker was trim and driven. He cradled his cell phone to his ear, listening for a while, then talking rapidly, working out details with the insurance people. He often referred to the yellow legal pad and file he carried, making notes as he went along. Unable to sit any longer, Liz got up and walked over to her dad. When he looked up, she said, "I'll be right back. I'm going to get something to drink. Do you want anything?" "Coffee," her dad said. "Thanks." Then he turned his attention back to the phone conversation. Liz left the waiting room and walked to the small alcove filled with vending machines. She pushed $1 in, then made her selection. A shadow slid across the vending machine surface as Liz straightened with the soda can in hand. Startled, remembering how she hadn't seen the ghost back in the cafe, and suddenly wondering if they'd left shadows or reflections, Liz spun around. "Are you all right?" Isabel asked. "I'm fine," Liz responded. "You startled me." "Sorry," Isabel apologized. "No harm done. What brings you here?" "I talked to Michael," Isabel explained. "I heard what happened at the crash down." She paused, looking around. "Isn't Max here?" Liz folded her arms self-consciously. "No." "Do you know where he is?" Isabel asked. "No," Liz answered. Irritation showed in Isabel's eyes and face. "If you see him, tell him I need to talk to him." "Sure," Liz agreed, refraining from telling Isabel the same thing. She didn't want Max to think she was looking for him. If he came to her, she wanted him to come on his own, not because he thought she needed him. Then she realized that was exactly why she was faulting him for not being there at the hospital, for not coming when he knew she might need him. Is something wrong? Isabel hesitated, then said, "The ghost at the Crashdown Cafe hasn't been the only ghost sighting lately." "I know," Liz replied. "Michael said he saw one a few days ago when he was working in the desert." Understanding dawned in her as she watched Isabel. "You've seen a ghost too?" "I saw something," Isabel agreed. "That's why I need to talk to Max." She paused. "I need you to do another favor for me." Liz was instantly attentive. Isabel never asked for favors. "Sure," Liz said. "I don't think it will ever come up, but if it does, would you tell my dad that I came over to see how you were as soon as I heard about what happened at the crash down?" Liz blinked, waiting for an explanation. It didn't come. "Okay," she said, but she wondered what Isabel was hiding. Liz felt paranoid all of a sudden that all of them were keeping secrets from her. Isabel checked her watch. "When did you get here?" "I don't know, maybe 45 minutes ago?" Isabel gave a short nod. "If my dad happens to ask you when I got here, can you tell him that I got here 5 minutes after you did?" "Sure," Liz replied. Straight arrow Isabel, wanting to lie to her parents? The world might be ending after all. "Thanks," Isabel said. "I've got to check on something. I'll be back in a few minutes." "Okay." Liz stood there dumbfounded, feeling the cold soda can turning her hand numb. Isabel turned and walked down one of the hospital corridors like she knew where she was going. Terrific, Liz thought with a scowl. Now I'm messenger girl. She located the coffee machine and pushed in another $1. She slipped the coffee cup from behind the protective plastic door and turned around to find Jim Valenti standing behind her. She was so startled she almost dropped the coffee. "Something the matter?" Valenti asked. He was raw-boned and rangy, a product of the rawhide cowboy influence that lingered in New Mexico. He wore jeans and a white Western shirt and a pair of hand-tooled cowboy boots. He carried a white hat in one hand that marked him as one of the good guys in the old TV Land Gunsmoke episode. No, Liz replied, keeping control of the drinks she was carrying. You look like you've seen a ghost, Valenti said. Liz shot him a wry look. Sorry, Valenti apologized with a grin. After I heard the story, I thought I'd drop by and see if it was true. I didn't see a ghost, Liz said. Valenti nodded and twirled his hat on his finger. I thought it was a bunch of hogwash, but I'm having trouble filling hours these days. A short time back, Valenti had been let go from his deputies as sheriff. He had been holding back information that would have exposed Max, Isabel, and Michael. It's not all hogwash, Liz said. There was, she hesitated, something. Michael saw it. Valenti's eyes narrowed and his forehead wrinkled in thought. The way I heard it, you and Maria were standing beside Wilkins when he went down. We were, Liz agreed. But you didn't see anything? No. Valenti sighed, and Maria? Didn't see anything, Liz said. And did Michael say what he saw? A man, Liz tried to remember everything Michael had told her during the frantic and whispered conversation they'd managed to have before the ambulance arrived. Someone Michael knew? No, Michael said. This guy was tall and stooped, like he'd spent a lot of time hunched over so he wouldn't bump his head on things. What about his eyes? Valenti asked. The interest the ex-sheriff had in the matter was immediately apparent to Liz. Michael said the ghost only had one eye. The other one was covered by a patch. Valenti scratched his beard-stubbled chin with the thumbnail sounding like sandpaper. A one-eyed ghost, eh? Does that mean something to you? Liz asked. Maybe, Valenti admitted. 30 years ago, my dad started looking for Leroy Wilkins' partner, a one-eyed man named Terrell Swanson. A chill flashed through Liz. Wilkins mentioned that name in the cafe. He said that Swanson was chasing him. Valenti twirled his hat, his preoccupation evident. My dad never found Terrell Swanson. He believed that Wilkins killed Swanson in a fight over the uranium strike back in the 60s, then hid the body. Liz stared into Valenti's blue eyes. You think the ghost is real? She asked. I think, Valenti said, that I want to talk to Michael. He's still at the crash down? Yeah, Liz said. How is Wilkins doing? I don't know. The EMTs who arrived at the cafe thought he was having a heart attack. I don't think they know if he's going to make it. Will that mean there'll be one more ghost to haunt Roswell? The thought sent tiny goosebumps up the back of Liz's neck. You're going to be around for a while? Liz nodded. Glancing back towards the ER proper, Valenti said, let me know if anything happens here that I need to know about. Sure, Liz said. Valenti placed his cowboy hat back on, smoothing the brim with a forefinger. He gave Liz a solemn look. I'll be in touch if this looks like something that might spill over on you and your friends. Then he was gone, striding back through the waiting room and hitting the crash bars on the door in the main parking area. Mind racing, facing unwelcome thoughts and feelings of the absence of Max, Liz turned to the waiting room and gave her father his coffee. He was so mired by his conversation with the insurance people that he barely acknowledged the coffee delivery or her departure. Liz returned to her chair and held the soda can in her hands. She gazed out through the slated windows. Oh, Max, where are you? Max trudged back to his car with Riverdog at his side. The hot sun beat down on him, sapping his reserves. He looked forward to the Cutlass's air conditioning. You should forgive George Greyhawk and the men with him, Riverdog was saying. Fear makes men do many strange things. Max stopped by his car and gazed back down at the Mesalico city. During the walk back through the houses, he had seen a number of people staring at him. The weird thing was he couldn't be certain how many of them were really alive and how many of them weren't. Something's wrong, Max said. What do you mean? Riverdog asked. If the ghost really wanted you out of the area, why doesn't an army of them appear and chase your people out? There have been several appearances of the spirits, and this has been going on for days. They are gathering. You saw what Henry Collingcrow did to everybody back there. If a group of them got together like that, they could level your village. Riverdog nodded, taking time before he spoke. Until today, until your arrival, the ghosts have been unable to make physical contact with anyone. But Collingcrow wrecked that house before we arrived there. True, but you were in the village. Max looked at the sprawl of houses scattered across the hills. It can't be, he said. You told me this first happened hundreds of years ago. The spaceship that stranded us here didn't arrive until 1947. No one like me was around hundreds of years ago. I do not know all of the answers, but I know that your presence here has had an effect on things. I think it would be better if you left. Pain stung Max, and part of the emotion turned into anger. He didn't belong anywhere. Tess had betrayed him, betrayed them all, and Liz wasn't exactly glad he stayed around these days. Max opened the Cutlass door. After the reception, I got here. I don't want to come back. He stepped into the car and slid behind the wheel. The seat cover was hot. You came here for reasons of your own today, Riverdog said. Max's throat felt thick and he couldn't swallow the painful knot that had formed there. I have a son. Blessings be upon you, Riverdog said. A son is a powerful thing to have, as well as a great responsibility. He was taken from me, Max said. Sorrow showed in Riverdog's eyes. I'm sorry. I was hoping that you knew something more of the Granolith, or a way I might go after my son. Riverdog shook his head. I told you all I know of the things that Nasato told me of the place where you came from. Then maybe there's something else out here, Max said, something Nasato didn't give you, something that might help me track the Granolith. Once I get this thing done, Riverdog said, and I get my people settled in and protected again, I'll be glad to help you look. Thank you, Max said. When you get back to Roswell, the shaman said, see if you and the others can find out more about the spirits that are haunting Roswell. Max narrowed his eyes, reducing his field of vision. What do you mean? The spirits are also invading Roswell. How do you know? People from the village have returned from shopping there today. While I was caring for Kathy Collingcrow at her home, several of them talked to me. There was an attack on the Crashdown Cafe. Oh my God, Max thought. Liz, was anyone hurt? Only a man, Riverdog answered. His name is Leroy Wilkins. The name meant nothing to Max. Wilkins is known to us, Riverdog went on. Nearly 30 years ago, Wilkins was almost put in jail for mining on reservation land. I've got to go, Max said. He twisted the key in the ignition, listening to the engine rumble to life. Riverdog leaned back from the car's window and stood. A piece of this journey yet remains to you. Max waved the man's words off as he jammed the transmission into reverse. The Cutlass's tires spun against the sand-covered ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. Screeching to a halt, Max put the car in a forward gear and peeled out, getting back onto the road that would take him to the highway, back to Roswell. As he followed the crooked trail back up the hillside that led to the highway, movement on Max's right caught his attention. Amid the waves of shimmering heat coasting above the sandy terrain, a dozen riders gathered on horseback. All of the riders were Indian braves. Although the images didn't come across as sharply and distinctly as the images of Bear Killer and Henry Collingcrow, Max had no problem recognizing the war paint that turned their faces into angry, otherworldly masks. The ponies pranced and shifted, tails flicking as the riders talked to one another and stared at the Cutlass. Then, with voices yelling loud enough to be heard over the Cutlass's engine and air conditioner, the warriors kicked their mounts into full gallop. They lifted their spears and bows high as they took up pursuit of Max's car. Watching the rearview mirror, staying in the middle of the dirt road to avoid the bar ditches and ruts on either side, Max saw the war party disappear in the fog and swirling dust of the Cutlass that it swirled up. He could no longer see Riverdog either. At the top of the rise, Max kept the accelerator pressed down hard and ignored the stop sign at the end of the road. He yanked the wheel to the left, throwing the Cutlass into a controlled skid across both lanes of the highway. Rubber shrilled, and for a moment, he fought the car for control. Then he had the Cutlass aimed for Roswell, hoping that he didn't trip a state policeman's radar.
Chapter 10. Did it ever even cross your mind to try to save me while you were saving Liz? Pinned by the question, knowing that never in a million years would he have figured on being asked that, Michael stared at Maria. Only silence, interrupted by the hissing cough of expiring soap bubbles in the three-compartment kitchen sink stretched between them. I was standing between you and the ghost, Michael pointed out. You were protected, even when I knocked Liz to the floor. Angrily, Maria put one soapy fist on her hip. Since I couldn't see the ghost, I guess I'm supposed to take your word for that. Michael thought about her statement. Like the previous question, whatever answer he gave was a minefield that could be turned against him. You weren't hurt, he pointed out. I could have been. I could have been too, Michael said. I wasn't. You weren't. We got off lucky. Maria shook her head. I can't believe you. That's the best response you have? Maria, I thought about saving you. You thought about saving me? Maria asked. Knowing you deliberately chose not to save me makes this even worse, Michael. Actually, Michael was of the opinion that things couldn't get any worse, or that the change was so infinitesimal he couldn't tell the difference. I didn't choose not to save you, he argued. You chose to save Liz. She was nearest the ghost, Michael explained. And how do I know that? Because I'm telling you. Maria glared at him doubtfully. You were the one who saw the ghost. I have to take your word for it. When the old guy gets out of the hospital, Michael said, ask him. So you chose who you would save. I prioritized, Michael replied. Figured out who was in the greatest danger. Maria's eyes flashed. You sorted us out. Michael knew better than to say anything at that point. The conversation was going south with the speed of an avalanche. Michael, Maria said, you don't even sort your laundry. Yes, I do. Michael remembered long, boring arguments on that subject. Something about brightness of colors and fabric density and textures. Those lectures had been about as exciting as taking history class from a football coach. So now sometimes, especially when Maria was around, he remembered to sort out the colors and fabrics. Fine, Maria said. People aren't laundry. Michael was stunned for a moment. People aren't laundry? That's an argument? That's an observation, Maria told him. Evidently a distinction that you aren't able to make. Realizing that he wasn't going to be able to talk to her until she'd gotten over being mad, Michael retreated. I'm going to take the trash out. Fine, Maria said, diving back into the dishes. Fine, Michael echoed. He spun around and marched back into the dining area. A half dozen large garbage bags sat there waiting to be taken out. Still angry, he grabbed two of them up. Unable to take the strain of the sudden yank, the bottoms ripped out of the garbage bags. Unfinished meals and drinks tumbled to the floor, making a bigger mess than had been there before. Michael cursed. I told you that you should have filled up the garbage cans instead of just using bags, Maria called from the kitchen. Then you could have taken them outside without worrying about them breaking open like that. Guess you didn't prioritize that, huh? A heavy sigh escaped Michael. The cleanup suddenly felt hours longer with all the work he was going to have to do again and the crappy mood Maria was in. Just as he was going for his broom and dustpan, an SUV with a local news channel insignia stopped in front of the cafe. A man in a suit got out on the passenger side, reached back for a jacket, and shrugged into the garment. A man in blue jeans and a University of New Mexico tank stepped out of the back of the SUV. Gazing at the street in the Crashdown Cafe, he took a Spider-Man baseball cap from his back pants pocket and pulled it on. He reached back in the vehicle and took out a minicam. Shoot some exteriors first, Bob, the news anchor said as he buttoned his jacket. He took a microphone out of a special case on the SUV's dash. And check the audio levels on this mic before we film this spot. The bored look on the cameraman's face broadcast his irritation at the other man. I've been doing my job longer than you've been at the station, Marty. I know my stuff. You'll take direction, Marty ordered crisply, or I'll have the station send out another cameraman in time for the 5 o'clock show. Bob reversed his head and shouldered the minicam. You do that, Maddie. Every cam operator at the station will screw you over. You'll be doing every spot missing half your head or with a zit the size of Mount Rainier occupying center focus. A lot of people can talk in front of a camera. Not everybody can shoot with one. The warning didn't go over well with Marty, and Bob obviously didn't care. Tommy, Marty said. Yo, the driver responded. See if you can round up some of the locals for interviews. There's always somebody who wants to be on television. And give me somebody who saw the ghost that did this. Okay, Michael told himself, struggling to think calmly and clearly. This is really not good. When you walk into one of those decrepit places, what's the first thing you wonder about? Kyle Valenti reached for the rag tied at his waist and mopped the perspiration from his face. He lifted the protective mask filter over his mouth and nose and wiped his chin too. The air inside the condemned building was stale, turgid, and thick with dust. He felt the grit clinging to his exposed skin. He wore a t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, jeans, and a tool belt that still made him walk off balance because he wasn't used to the weight. The first thing I think about, Kyle replied as he settled the mask back over his face, is how soon I can get out of here. Not me. Doyle Quinlan was a local building contractor. He was a short fireplug of a man who shaved his head. He wore a mask, gloves, a sweat-soaked chambray work shirt, and work slacks. He shone a flashlight around the Deversville room. Kyle waited, grateful to take a break. Quinlan was self-employed and had 5 kids. The man worked like a machine and seemed invertible. He was in his 40s and could work most guys in their 20s into the ground. Nope, Quinlan said, sweeping the flashlight over heaps of broken furniture, boxes of old clothes, books, and a whole lot of other things that people no longer had a use for. What I wonder about is if anybody ever died in one of these places. Now there's a pleasant thought, Kyle commented. He slapped at his mask, knocking collected dust free. It's something to think about. Quinlan turned the flashlight's beam to the walls. Real estate companies don't have to tell you that somebody croaked in the house you're hoping to buy. The house you and your father live in. Somebody could have died there. As if I don't have enough worries, Kyle thought. Now I have to worry that ghosts walk through my house. Of course, Quinlan said, I'm not the superstitious type, but I've got a healthy respect for ghosts. He directed the beam at a window covered over with a sheet of plywood. Rip that plywood out of the way and let's get some more light in here. Kyle hoisted the heavy crowbar from the floor. When he first started working for Quinlan a week ago, he hadn't thought much of the crowbar's weight. The tool had been a little heavier than a baseball bat. Now the thing felt like a blacksmith's anvil at the end of a 12 or 14-hour day. My mother passed away a few weeks ago, Quinlan went on. Sorry to hear that. Kyle shoved the straightest end of the crowbar onto the plywood and started pulling. Yeah, Quinlan said. She was always on to me about losing things. You know, keys, my wallet, my wedding ring, since I don't wear that to work. Nails screeched as they pulled free of the wall. Gradually, the plywood section came loose. Sunlight split the darkness of the room, playing on the dust motes eddying into the air. Anyway, Quinlan said, my mom always has this special place she put my things when she found them and knew that I wouldn't remember where I left them. About 2 years ago, I lost my wedding ring for a couple weeks. I looked everywhere. My wife looked everywhere. My kids even looked everywhere because I offered a reward. Nothing. No doing. Couldn't find the ring anywhere. Kyle grabbed the plywood and hauled the section to the floor. The plywood landed with a thump that raised a dust cloud that reminded him of a nuclear bomb blast. Then one night, Quinlan said, I have this dream about my mom telling me to look in that little place she had. She'd come to live with us for the last 4 years of her life. Anyway, I get up the next morning, remember the dream, and go to the hiding place. Guess what I found? The ring, Kyle said. Yeah, Quinlan flicked off the flashlight beam. With the plywood off the dirt-streaked window, more light invaded the room, battling the darkness back and illuminating the surroundings enough to get around without falling. What I'm saying is that maybe you should keep an open mind about ghosts. I'll do that. Quinlan pointed to the other covered windows. Let's tear down those for starters, and then get the cleanup crews in here and start gutting these rooms. Grateful for the change in topic, Kyle threw himself into the work. 50-plus years ago, the 3-story building near Roswell's downtown area had been a cheap hotel that rented by the day, by the week, and by the month. For the last 20 years, the building had been primarily derelict, rented by a few businesses to store stuff that was basically a collection of junk that no one had bothered to officially throw out. Now, someone had bought the building and hired Quinlan Construction to revamp and remodel the structure into a telecommunications marketing center to take advantage of the changing labor force in the city. As Kyle attacked the covered windows, yanking down the plywood and letting more light into the room, Quinlan busied himself marking the permanent walls that couldn't come down in the deconstruction phase. Only a few of the walls had to remain to provide support for the offices. There should be a bathroom back there, Quinlan said after Kyle had finished with the windows. Crack it open and let's have a look. According to the blueprints, we should be able to tear that out of there. Kyle crossed to the door and halted when a defensive stench reached his nostrils, even through the mud-caked mask filter. Smells like something died in there. Sewer gas, Quinlan replied. Once the water in the building was shut off, the pipes all went dry. With no water in the S-traps to seal off the gas coming back from the sewer, the gas flows back up the pipe. Oh, Kyle replied. During the construction gigs, he'd also learned a lot more about plumbing than he'd ever wanted to know. The bathroom was a small, full size with a tub shower ensemble, a toilet, and a sink. Broken sheetrock littered the floor. Kyle opened his mouth and breathed. Not breathing through his nose helped mute the stench, but the experience was still pretty harsh. How bad is it? Quinlan asked. Bad, Kyle assured him. I'm talking about the construction work. We're going to have to tear out all the pipes and fixtures, right? Yeah, A silver glint on the floor caught Kyle's attention. He peered more closely, then figured out that the glint had been a trick of the light. Nothing was there now. Kyle. The thin whisper permeated the room and made the hair on the back of Kyle's neck stand to attention. Primitive instinct, a concrete fear of the unknown, froze Kyle in place. Kyle. The soft, syllabate sound repeated. Mouth suddenly dry, Kyle had trouble with swallowing. Do you have someone else up here with us? No, why? I thought I heard somebody in here, Kyle said. Better have a look, Quinlan said. There may be transients, your kids prowling around in here. They look for places like this to flop or party occasionally. I've had it happen before. Kyle stared at the dust-streaked translucent glass that encased the shower. No other place in the room was large enough for someone to hide it. You got that window open in there yet? Quinlan asked. Getting to it, Kyle responded. Where is it? According to the blueprints, the only window in that room is on the east wall. Kyle looked to his left, then spotted the covered window. He'd missed the window because it was smaller than the windows in the outer rooms, and because the cabinets around the window helped camouflage it. The window was also close to the enclosed shower. I found it, Kyle said. He moved to the wall and lifted the crowbar. Before he could slide the crowbar into position, movement to his right, made murky by the pebble design of the shower stall glass, drew his attention. The figure on the other side of the shower glass looked vague and indistinct, but the shape was definitely moving. Kyle, you are a friend of Max, Isabel, and Michael. They must go. Fear hammered through Kyle. Ever since he got involved with Liz and her alien friends, his life had never been the same. The weird things that had gone on had activated his dad's obsession with an old unsolved case of his grandfather's. Then they learned the truth about Max, Isabel, and Michael, about their alien heritage. Despite his fear, Kyle peered through the shower glass, trying to get a better look at the figure on the other side. There was something vaguely familiar about the shape. He reached out with a shaking hand and slid the shower door open. A dead man stood in the shower cubicle. He was thin and young, his dead flesh ground into bloody hamburger by the road that had killed him. His face was black with bruising where it wasn't red, gooey, and dripping. Stay away from them, Kyle, the dead man said. Their time is coming. They will be haunted. They will be hunted and sought after. Everyone with them will suffer the same fate. Fear gripped Kyle, holding his feet as tightly as cured concrete. The dripping horror in the shower suddenly grabbed the glass edges of the shower and stepped towards Kyle. Panicking, Kyle tried to dive backward. His foot slipped on loose debris. He twisted as he fell, flailing his arms as the dead man hovered over him. The crowbar crashed through the glass surrounding the shower, shattering the glass into huge shards. One of the shards slid against Kyle's left arm, slicing neatly through the flesh. The cut instantly filled with blood, then overflowed and ran down his arm. A steady stream dripped to the floor as he landed on his butt beside the enclosed shower. The dead man leaned down towards Kyle, revealing the hideous gashes left from rough contact with street pavement. Kyle now remembered who the dead man was, though he hadn't thought about him in years. Stay away, Kyle gasped. The burning pain of the cut reached him, as well as the initial fear of the amount of blood he was losing. Stay away! The dead man leaned in more closely. His hands left bloody smears on the bathtub's edge. They are going to die, Kyle. We are going to kill them, just as we kill anyone who stands with them against us. Kyle! Quinlan yelled from the other room. Footsteps drummed against the floor. Stay away, Kyle told the dead man. Quinlan burst into the room, taking in Kyle at a glance. Hold on, Kyle, the man said. Just hang on. You're going to be all right. He took his shirt off and wrapped the garment around Kyle's injured arm. Do you see him? Kyle demanded, pushing back from the dead man leaning out of the shower. See who? Quinlan asked. He struggled to take up the slack in the shirt and tie the cloth off tightly. The man, Kyle said. He suddenly felt like he couldn't get air to breathe. Calm down, Quinlan said. You're going to be hyperventilating in that mask. Everything's going to be all right. No, Kyle said, fighting to back away as the gory dead man leaned in. He tried to lift his arms to protect himself. How could Quinlan not see the dead man? Kyle, Quinlan said. Kyle! The dead man reached for Kyle, his bloody palm turned outward to cover Kyle's face. 11, Alison.
You're 11. Isabel found Jesse sitting in the emergency room admittance area. He still wore his suit, but had the jacket draped over the chair beside him. Every line in his body was tense. He stared out the windows into the parking lot. The two nurses at the admittance desk stayed busy, handling the phones and processing patients. Isabel crossed the room. Jesse must have spotted her reflection in the glass, because he turned around to look at her. His clothing and his hair still held a fine layer of desert dust. Isabel resisted taking his hand or standing too close to him. Roswell was simply too small to take such risks. Someone would see them and jump to the obvious and right conclusion, and word would get back to her dad. "You doing okay?" Jesse asked. "I'm fine," Isabel said. Not sitting beside him, not touching him was hard, and it got more difficult every time she saw him in her dad's offices. "How's your friend?" Jesse asked. "She's okay," Isabel said. "Maybe a little stressed, but nobody got hurt." Jesse pointed at the television hanging from the ceiling in the corner by the admittance desk. "Local news station is covering the story." Isabel stared at the television screen. She watched in disbelief as footage of the front of the crashdown played on the set. "They're suggesting that the damage was done by a poltergeist," Jesse said. "Totally weird, don't you think?" Isabel tried not to hesitate. "Yes," she replied. To cover her momentary lapse, she asked a tension-filled question of her own. "Did you let my dad know you were here?" Jesse nodded. "I told him I witnessed the accident and that I felt I needed to stay here to make sure the woman was okay. He understood. Then he told me you were here. Told me to help you if you needed it. He's got a conference call that he couldn't put off." The whispering tone reminded Isabel of how much they were hiding, of how much they had at risk, or at least how much she felt they had at risk. She gazed into his dark eyes. Why hadn't she ever felt like this about someone from Roswell High? Then guilt filled her. She hadn't felt that way about anyone in high school because none of the guys she'd been around there had been Jesse Ramirez. "How is the woman doing?" Isabel asked. "She's going to be okay. The police contacted her husband. He's here now." Jesse paused. "Do you remember how she was crying out for her baby?" Isabel suppressed a shiver as she remembered the child thing that had threatened her. I know, she did feel that way about Alex, Jody. She folded her arms across her chest. "Yes. She had a baby," Jesse said, "a little girl. But she died in childbirth." "That's horrible," Isabel said, and she thought it was even more horrible because the thing in the vehicle had known of the woman's loss and had used that pain against the woman. But that didn't explain why Jesse hadn't been able to see the child thing. "Yeah," Jesse said. "It is. I heard the state police interviewing her husband when he got here. They wanted to make sure there hadn't been a baby or that nothing had happened to the child." "Is the woman going to be okay?" "The cut on her head isn't serious. The seatbelt held her in place and the airbag protected her from most of the crash. But that doesn't explain why she freaked out and lost control of her vehicle." Isabel was silent for a moment, knowing that she knew exactly what had caused the woman to lose control, although she didn't know where the child thing had come from. But she couldn't tell that to Jesse. The fact was a reminder of how much distance actually separated them, and she didn't know how or if they could bridge the gap. "Hey," Jesse said softly. She looked at him. "It's going to be okay," he said. "I know," she said, and she wanted to believe him, but she knew he didn't know everything he needed to in order to make that prediction. There were still too many things about her that he didn't know. Here at the scene of what is believed by some to be the result of a poltergeist manifestation. Michael leaned against the pass-through window at the back of the crashdown and watched the news anchor Marty Lackley roll through his spiel. They were on the third take, and Marty wasn't happy with the job Bob, the cameraman, was doing. Marty was also not happy that Nancy Parker had forbidden the news crew to step into the cafe. The part where the news reporter had gotten indignant and insisted on the public's right to know if the crashdown was haunted had been hilarious. The scene had taken some of the edge off the argument that Michael and Maria seemed to be locked into. However, when Maria had seen Michael smiling at the reporter's discomfort, she'd gotten mad all over again. Apparently, they were in another one of those arguments where everything was supposed to be unhappy for everybody until they somehow fixed what was wrong. Since Michael didn't feel that he'd done anything wrong, he didn't have a clue how to fix the situation. The only good thing was the construction crew Nancy Parker had called in had arrived, and they was in the process of taking over the cleanup. They didn't want anyone else in the cafe while they repaired the broken glass and electrical damage. Michael gazed at the crowd still gathered on the other side of the street. The numbers had dwindled, but newcomers wanting to gawk or get a chance to be interviewed where television had arrived to replace the people who had to move on or had gotten bored. One of the construction men stepped through the broken front window and out onto the sidewalk. Once there, the guy was fair game for the news team. Marty hurried forward, gesturing Bob, the cameraman, to keep up. Marty intercepted the construction guy and shoved a microphone in the guy's face, announcing his name and giving the station's call letters. Can you tell us if there's any truth to the rumor that the cafe owners have hired your company to excavate the graves covered by the foundation here? Marty asked. With increased interest, Michael watched the construction guy struggle to deal with the reporter's question. It's not my company, the construction guy replied. And there's no... Did you see the ghost? The reporter asked. The construction worker hesitated, glaring a little at the camera that was thrust into his face. I didn't see the ghost. How bad is the damage? The reporter pressed. Not too bad. I've seen a lot worse, I suppose. The construction owner stepped forward in the middle of the dining area. Kenny. The construction guy turned around. I need those tools, the owner said. Let's get to it. Marty, the anchorman, decided to try to use that as an opening to get inside the cafe. He started for the empty window. Are you the construction foreman? You'll be arrested for trespassing if you take one step in this building, Nancy Parker warned as she came from the kitchen area. Uncertain, Marty froze where he was, then took a step back. He scowled. You can't keep us from the truth, Mrs. Parker. We're the news. Oh, really, Mr. Lackley? Nancy Parker challenged. Is that what you want to do? Advertise that the Crashdown Cafe is haunted? She stepped out into the dining room. Because I think that's libel, and I'll have to speak with my husband's attorney to confirm that. I didn't say that, Marty said. You did. He lowered his voice and spoke over his shoulder. You getting this, Bob? Sure, the cameraman replied. You talking about ghosts is something I want to see the station run. We'll get you up and running on one of the syndicated stations in no time. Before you know it, you'll be heading up Survivor, Haunted House. Jim Valenti stepped into Marty Lackley's view. Despite the unkempt 3-day growth of beard, Valenti still broadcast waves of authority. Maybe he no longer wore the sheriff's star or carried a weapon, but he carried a presence with him. If I were you, Valenti said in a low voice, I'd step back, like the lady asked. You don't have any official presence here, Valenti, the reporter said. You were terminated in your capacity as sheriff. No, sir, Valenti agreed. I don't have any official presence, and that's a fact. But what I'm doing is offering you a piece of advice. I hope a bright guy like you is smart enough to take. His voice got harder. Because if you don't, and you continue to harass this place and these workers, I'm going to perform a citizen's arrest for trespassing and throw your butt in jail. He paused, smiling a little, but the mirth didn't touch his eyes. And that's a promise. Veins stood out in Marty's temples and neck. For a moment, Michael thought the reporter was going to make the mistake of calling Valenti's bluff. After dealing with the sheriff for the last 2 years and knowing him from a distance before that, Michael knew Valenti wasn't bluffing. Hey, Marty, Bob the cameraman called out in a voice marked with a little amusement. I'm rolling feet on this, too. Want me to keep it up? I mean, if you get yourself plotzed on the news and thrown in jail, the producer should be able to guarantee some faces in front of the tube tonight if they show teasers. The anchorman acted like he was going to push the wireless microphone in Valenti's direction. Then Marty wisely turned and walked away without another word. Thank you, Jim, Nancy Parker called from inside the cafe. Valenti turned and put his fingers to his hat brim. My pleasure, ma'am. May I come inside for a minute? Of course. And could I take a minute of your time? Nancy Parker nodded. Valenti stepped through the door and quietly conferred with her. Hey, Maria called from the pass-through window behind Michael. Michael turned to face her. You need to get busy, Maria admonished him. Why? Michael asked. I get to do the big meeting scene with Isabel and Max later. I don't mind putting that off. Maria glared at him. Because we might be able to have some time to ourselves before the others arrive. Are you through being mad? If she was, Michael knew that the incident would be some kind of world record. Not entirely. Not entirely, Michael translated to himself, meaning we're still going to have to talk the whole thing to death. Hey, Michael, Valenti called. Turning around, surprised, Michael glanced at Valenti and waited. Mrs. Parker says she can spare you, Valenti said. Since you have the time, I'd like you to come with me. Why? Michael asked. Because you've got a good memory for faces, Valenti answered. And you were in here during the incident. Maybe we can find the accessory. Michael considered it. Go with Valenti on some wild goose chase for an accessory who doesn't exist, or stay here and let Maria keep busting my chops. Sure, Michael responded. He took his apron off and tossed it onto the stainless steel surface of the pass-through window. Michael, Maria called in exasperation. Michael turned to face her. What about tonight? Maria asked. Michael shrugged. I guess it'll still be there. He paused. Oh, and if you or the others get there before me, go ahead and let yourselves in. He went to join Valenti, feeling Maria staring daggers into his back. Bugging out now wasn't going to make things any more difficult between them, and he needed out of the cafe and away from the tension. Besides that, he didn't figure Valenti had dropped in for a social call. Valenti didn't say anything enlightening as he led the way out of the crashdown, and by the news reporters gathered like a murder of crows around fresh roadkill. Michael kept up with Valenti, then got in on the passenger side of the truck. Valenti fired up the engine and pulled out into the street. Michael looked at him, noticing the thick file folder lying on the seat between them. Accessory. Valenti returned his gaze full measure. Yeah, you saw somebody besides Wilkins at the crashdown today, right? Michael stayed quiet, paying attention as Valenti wound through the streets of downtown Roswell and headed east. Valenti also checked the mirrors frequently. Are you expecting company? Michael asked. Valenti smiled sourly. Anything that ties into the three of you carries the possibility of government involvement. I don't expect it, but I don't want to be surprised either. Michael accepted that without comment. I saw Liz at the hospital, Valenti explained. She told me this is the second ghost you've seen. If they are ghosts, Michael said. You don't think they are? I don't believe in ghosts. Did you get a good look at the thing that was chasing Leroy Wilkins? Valenti asked. I saw him, Michael agreed. With his free hand, Valenti reached for the file folder on the seat between them. He opened the folder and took out an 8x10 black and white photograph. He slid the photograph across to Michael and then tapped the image with a forefinger. Is that the guy? Michael stared at the image. The man looked like he was in his 40s. His face was seamed and tight, the features of a man who had been out often in the elements. The most memorable aspect of the man's face was the eye patch. Is that the guy you saw? Valenti asked. Yeah, Michael replied. This is him. Who is he? His name is Terrell Swanson, Valenti said. He turned up missing 30 years ago. My dad investigated Swanson's disappearance. His feeling was that Swanson was dead. What about the other ghost you saw? Tiller Osborne's dad. Valenti nodded. I heard something about that. Bulmer had to bring Tiller back and admit him to the hospital. The doctor had to sedate him to get him to calm down. Was it Tiller's dad? I don't know. I never really paid attention to Tiller's dad. He was never around much. Tiller seemed to think it was. He'd probably know, Valenti agreed. What happened? Michael recounted the events of that night, drawing the comparisons between the two ghostly apparitions. A static electricity buildup? Valenti asked when he'd finished. Yeah. Any reason why? No. And no one but you and the victim saw the ghost today or that night? No. Any ideas why not? Michael shot Valenti a look. Right, Valenti said with a sigh. At least a static electricity buildup is something I can sense, even if I can't see the ghosts. He flipped the file open again for an instant, then put Swanson's picture back in the folder. They drove in silence for a time. Only the hum of the tires filled the truck cab. So don't you want to know where I'm taking you? Valenti asked. I know where you're taking us, Michael said. You think so? Wilkins' house, Michael said. That's why you checked the address again. Valenti grinned mirthlessly. When the mile marker on the highway came up, he turned right, followed a dirt road section line that had a clutch of chaparral and a truck full of kids selling farm produce, with their grandparents at the corner. Valenti honked and waved. Know why I'm bringing you with me? Valenti asked. Michael glanced at the mirror mounted on the passenger side of the truck. A dust cloud whipped along in their wake, eerily mindful of the ghosts he'd seen. Because I see dead people, Michael answered.